past few days, the response to the news about Omar Khadr has been swift and vocal. Canadians are shocked by Justin Trudeau's decision to give a $10.5 million secret payout to the terrorist who killed U.S. Army Sergeant Christopher Speer in Afghanistan. And make no mistake, this settlement is a choice made by Justin Trudeau. And what's worse, Justin Trudeau is hiding it from Canadians. And this payout is a slap in the face to the men and women in uniform who face incredible danger every day to keep us safe. It's one thing to acknowledge alleged mistreatment, but the Liberals have rushed to make this payment, effectively ensuring Tabitha Speer would not have the opportunity to have her claim heard. Showing such contempt to a widow of a war hero who lost his life saving the lives of others on the battlefield is not just wrong, it's disgusting. This shows such a mean-spirited attitude towards the true victims in this whole ordeal. And when asked about this matter repeatedly, Justin Trudeau dodged any accountability to Canadians for spending millions of their dollars in this way. Trudeau promised transparency from his government, yet the payment was made 2 days ago, and we only heard about it through leaked media reports. He had multiple opportunities to explain his choice in this matter, but he refused. This sends a terrible message to Canada's men and women in uniform and our allies around the world. And for all their bravery and sacrifice, our veterans now see Prime Minister Trudeau handing $10.5 million to a convicted terrorist who fought against them in Afghanistan. Sergeant Speer's family has struggled with the loss of their husband and father since his death at Khadr's hands in 2002. I cannot imagine what they have endured in these past 15 years, and my thoughts have been with them since this news first broke. If Omar Khadr is truly sorry for what he has done, that money would be given directly to the family of Sergeant Speer. Justin Trudeau should never have agreed to a secret deal that gave a convicted terrorist millions of dollars. Seeking money from the Canadian taxpayer is just a sign of continuing contempt for the country that Khadr has fought against. En tant que Premier ministre, je me serais battu en justice contre.
As Prime Minister, I would have gone to court to fight this payment, and I would have been very clear taxpayers should not make a payment to a recognized terrorist.
And made absolutely clear taxpayers won't be rewarding an admitted terrorist. Now it's up to Justin Trudeau to explain his decision to Canadians. I'll take your questions now. Thank you.
Mr. Scheer, given that Omar Khadr had a court decision too, in fact, from the Supreme Court, had an active $20 million lawsuit against the government of Canada, how specifically would you have avoided such a payout?
I would have avoided a settlement. I would have refused to agree to this settlement. And I will point out that the Supreme Court, while acknowledging that Canadian officials acted improperly, did not speak to remedy, did not speak to how that situation should have been remedied. I believe very firmly that the repatriation of Omar Khadr is the remedy that accounts, that balances the actions of those Canadian officials. The fact that he is in Canada today is the remedy, is the compensation for what happened to him.
Do you accept the premise that Omar Khadr was a child soldier?
You know, those types of definitions are set in conventions and treaties that Canada signs on to. They're not subjective, they're objective criteria. But even here in Canada, often young offenders who commit heinous crimes are treated as adults.
But to Kellen's question, do you acknowledge that, in your opinion, was he a child soldier?
When you talk about determinations that are very specifically enshrined or encoded in treaties and legislation, that is not a subjective determination. It is prescribed in the very treaties that Canada signs on to. I think that is very clear. But let's be very clear. This is not about the actions. This is not about those aspects of this whole ordeal. This ordeal should have ended when Omar Khadr was repatriated back to Canada. That was the remedy for the actions that Canadian officials under the Chrétien and subsequent Martin governments were involved in.
En français, Monsieur Scheer, le gouvernement ce matin, dans son discours, a annoncé que les versements.
There was an announcement this morning as to the payments pertaining to his alleged treatment in Guantanamo. How do you react to that, in fact? How do you react to the violation of Mr. Khadr's rights at Guantanamo Bay? The Conservative Party has always supported the idea that all Canadians benefit from the law and the same rights. But the situation here, well, the solution really is, or was really, the repatriation of Mr. Khadr. That was to compensate him for his mistreatment. But paying out taxpayers' money to Mr. Khadr, that was a choice made by Mr. Trudeau. There were lots of criticism of the previous government's behaviour. Well, I know that Trudeau government would like to blame the previous government, but the situation with Mr. Khadr started under a Liberal government, and Canadian officials have made a decision under a new Liberal government. The Conservative government respected the Supreme Court's ruling and repatriated Mr. Khadr. That was a solution. That was a solution to Mr. Khadr's situation. In English now?
I understand that Justin Trudeau would like to place the blame on this on previous governments, but let's be clear about a couple of points. First of all, this whole ordeal started under Liberal governments. When the Supreme Court issued its ruling, the previous Conservative government repatriated Omar Khadr. The only remedy that was ever mentioned in court decisions for accounting for the actions of Canadian officials was that Mr. Khadr should be repatriated. The previous Conservative government did that. That's where this story should have ended.
But the interrogation of him by Canadian officials happened under a government you were part of.
I believe that if you check the interactions of Canadian officials with Omar Khadr that was then used by American forces was under the previous Liberal government. He was captured in Afghanistan and spent time in Guantanamo Bay. This whole ordeal started under the Liberal government. And I think the most important takeaway on this is that when the Supreme Court issued its ultimate decision that Mr. Khadr's rights were violated, the previous Conservative government repatriated Omar Khadr. He is in Canada today because of that, and that's where this story should have ended.
Should Khadr be held responsible for the crimes of his father? Should Khadr be held responsible for the crimes of his father?
Omar Khadr should be held accountable for what he did, for his actions. I believe that that's a fundamental point of justice, that people are responsible for their own actions. And as I said, this whole ordeal started under a Liberal government. When the courts ruled as they did, the previous Conservative government repatriated Mr. Khadr. That is the remedy that should have compensated for the actions of Canadian officials. This additional payment of taxpayers' dollars is a slap in the face to the men and women in uniform, to all those who have lost loved ones on the battlefield fighting terror with our allies. And it's not just wrong, it's disgusting. Canadians are rightly outraged, and Justin Trudeau has an obligation to face the music himself and explain why he took this decision upon himself to pay Omar Khadr this money.
Just to follow up on Carolyn's question, he fits the definition, the UN definition of a child soldier. Do you agree with that definition then?
I believe that these types of definitions are set in law, in convention. Those are objective criteria, not subjective. But I do point out that in Canada, under our own regime, we have situations where young offenders who commit heinous acts, who commit violent offenses, are tried as adults, face additional levels of judicial action. But again, all this comes, a key point here is this payment was rushed through after the government heard that the families of the victims were seeking their day in court, were seeking justice. I believe that they have effectively prevented the true victims in this whole ordeal from having an opportunity to have justice provided for their situation. That is outrageous. The fact that the Liberals have effectively prevented Tabitha Speer and her 2 children from having their case heard and seeking justice for their loss is reprehensible.
So, Mr. Scheer, besides this gesture, this position that you're taking of the Liberals' decision making, is there any other things that you can do in terms of in any way trying to influence the decision or change the decision? Is there any way, any sort of appeal that you would make, or is this purely a symbolic gesture of taking a stance against the decision making of Liberals? I mean, is there any actual action that you're going to take?
Well, I do note, to your point, I do note that clearly this decision has been in the works for quite some time. And the fact that the Prime Minister waited until the House of Commons has risen for the summer, where he doesn't face the scrutiny of the opposition, where any motions or things of that nature could be put to Parliament, speaks, I believe, to his lack of transparency and his efforts to avoid scrutiny on this. So we are speaking out on behalf of Canadian taxpayers. I'm speaking out today on behalf of all those who have lost loved ones in theatres of combat in past conflicts and in the current fight against terror. And I'm speaking out on behalf of Tabitha Speer and her 2 children, who are the real victims in this case.
May I comment on the timeline? You're correct. I am wondering, if you become Prime Minister, would you treat a case like this differently?
I can absolutely assure you.
I don't mean the payout, I mean the incarceration, etc.
I believe it's very important for every government, regardless of political stripe, to uphold Canadian laws and uphold Canadian principles of fundamental justice. And when those instances happen, it's appropriate for the Canadian government to respond appropriately. And the appropriate response in this situation has already happened. It was the repatriation of Omar Khadr. He is here today in Canada because of the previous Conservative government recognizing the court's ruling. That's where this story should have ended. Everything else is a decision by Justin Trudeau to go above and beyond that remedy and pay Omar Khadr apparently $10.5 million. They refuse to come clean on this, which is another point I'd like to expand on. Their defense of their actions, their defense of their choice, is that it would have ultimately cost more money to uphold the principle that Canadian taxpayers shouldn't have to pay Omar Khadr, and that this is somehow a bargain for Canadian taxpayers. I dismiss that absolutely. I believe that there is value in fighting for that principle, that we don't pay convicted terrorists compensation, and the fact that they aren't coming clean with the amount, they're asking us to trust them that it's a good deal. Well, I certainly don't trust them.